Hello, welcome to another video from Betfair Trading Community.com. Today what I want to do is I want to give you an overview of the football stats software. I had a question from a user who asked me about what the various things mean, and I realized that we don't have like a really basic overview of some of the terms used, what the actual stats themselves are. So I thought this would be really worth doing, and hopefully you'll find this informative. If you have any questions after this still on how to use it or anything like that, just contact us, info@betfairtradingcommunity.com, or comment on this video if you're watching it on YouTube. So here you can see this is the football stats software. This is the main piece of football stats software that you will be using. As you can see, we've got an example match that's coming up in a couple of days here from Argentina, Banfield versus Tigre, okay, and a bunch of stats to do with that match. Now, I've done quite a lot of videos on how I use these stats to trade, but what I'm going to focus on in this video in particular is creating a strategy and what the terms and stats mean when you're doing that. So to do this, we're just going to head over to the right-hand side here, and we're going to go about starting to create our strategy. Now, the first thing you're going to click is this select stats subject box. And this will give you options straight away as to whether you want your stat to look at the home team, the away team, overall, which is both teams, head-to-head between the teams, that means when they've played each other, and head-to-head overall, which means obviously home and away overall. And then Betfair, which is actually going to be to do with stats from Betfair. So things like what predominantly I use this for is Betfair odds. Okay. So as you see, I'll just select home to start with here. And the key with this is that whatever you pick here, that doesn't have to be the only thing you pick for your strategy. So if I select one stat with the home stat, I can still create another one with away, or I can still create an overall one, head-to-head, Betfair, etc. So don't worry too much about that. Don't worry that I don't want all my stats to be to do with the home team. They won't be. It's just for this specific stat. Now here's where we get into stat types, which I think is what needs a little bit of explaining to people. So when you start out, you're going to hopefully have an idea of the kind of strategy you want to create. And if you don't, you can use one of the example strategies that we have. You've got the members filters here. Remember, these aren't tips. These are just example strategies that you can use, you can adapt, you can edit. And you can use those to see what people are doing. So if we click edit filter, you can see, oh, okay, so this one has overall matches played greater than or equal to 8. And then overall full time, FT means full time, 0-0, which means 0-0 at full time. Percentage lower than or equal to 5%. And then overall goals scored per match, half to average, so that means in the second half, greater than or equal to 1.5. And overall goals scored per match, average, greater than or equal to 0. Okay, so the reason I've explained those kind of in depth there is that that's what you want to be looking at. You want to look at strategies like this and go, okay, do I understand what that stat means? And if you don't, obviously ask for clarification. But we're going to hopefully get into some of that a bit today. So let's go back to where we're selecting the stat subject and we're picking home. When you refresh the page, this is what you will get when you first come to the page before you click on anything on here, and you'll have the option to create a new filter. Okay, so this is the easiest way to do this. Now we also have import from file, and what you could do here is you can import the settings from a strategy that's been shared with you by us or by another member, and you can import that here, and we've obviously got plenty of those. And if you want us to give you one or even add one to your strategy portfolio for you, we will do that for you. But anyway, that's what that's for. What you're predominantly going to want to use here is going to be to create new filter. Okay, that's where we got to home. So back to home. Now let's say we're looking at the stat type again. We want to know, well, what's our stat looking for? So my stat might be, well, I want to find home teams that score an average of 2 goals per match 60, 70% of the time. Okay? Now, if that's the stat I'm looking for, the key word I use there is percentage. Okay? I'm looking for teams that have a high percentage. So I would select percentage. Then I would look for my stat. Okay? Now, the stat I just mentioned there was scoring 2 goals. Okay, and I'll get to that. What I want to get into here is explaining what some of these terms mean, because again, I think this is what people need a lot of help with. So, corners. Well, we know what corners are. This means corners for half one. So that would be corners for the home team in the first half, corners for the home team in the second half. Okay. Shots on target, we know what that is. Again, half one and half two, it's separate. Okay, so it's really important to kind of get to grips with using H1 and H2 and kind of understanding what that means. Let's see if we can find some other things. Goal attempts will just be attempts on goal, so that could be shots on or off target. Block shots is where a defender obviously blocks the shot. Matches with yellow cards, pretty self-explanatory in terms of the cards. Now, FT means full time, and these will be score lines next to it, okay? So that means full time 0-0, full time 1-0, etc., etc. Now, this is where a lot of people often ask me a question is, what does AU mean? So AU is the term any unquoted is what it stands for. Now, in Betfair parlance and in Betfair phraseology, what it means is that odds that a scoreline that isn't quoted on their market, on the correct score market. So if you notice on the Betfair market, on the correct score market, they'll have a list of scorelines like 1-0, 1-1, 2-1. You can bet on all of those. But once it gets past 3-all, they don't put score lines that have 4 goals plus in. So if it's 4-0, 4-1, 4-2, 5-0, 6-0, they just call it any unquoted. So that's where if you click this option, if you wanted to look for full-time scores that weren't ones that Betfair quotes in the market, that's what you'd select. This is goal times, okay? So goals for 0 to 10 just means 0 to 10 minutes. Goals scored in 11 to 20 minutes. 21 to 30, okay? So that is just goals being scored for, and then goals against obviously means conceded, goals conceded in those time frames. Total scored, total conceded, fairly self-explanatory. Half-time score lines, exactly the same as the full-time ones, just for the first half instead. So when it gets to half-time, is the score 2-2? Well, that's what that stat will show you. Half-time, full-time is a market where you bet on whether they're going to basically win both halves or what the result's going to be in both halves. So a win-win for the home team would be that the home team would have to win both halves. So they might win the match 2-0, but they'd have to then win each half 1-0. So they'd have to win the first half. They'd have to be ahead at half time and then ahead at the end. Okay, so that's basically what that means. You could have obviously 2-0 and then it'd still be 2-0 and things like that. So that's quite an interesting market. I don't think many people use that, so I wouldn't worry too much about that. It's not one I'd particularly use, as you can probably tell by my not great explanation there. Now, looking at 1-1, that just means whether they won in half one and then won in half two, etc. Pretty self-explanatory. League percentage from the top. This is a league position stat, quite an interesting one. It just basically means how far are they from the top of the league. Obviously, the bigger the percentage, the further down the table they are. You've got 1 by, so these are margins of victory. So you've got 1 by 1 goal, 1 by 2 goal, 1 by 3 plus, lost by 3 plus. Okay. Score draw is when it's 1-1, 2-2, 3-3. There's been goals, but it's a draw, so that just means all draws apart from a 0-0. Half-time score draw, obviously same thing for half-time. Overs, unders, again, over just means over 0.5 goals, so 1 plus goal is over 0.5. Same with over 1.5. And then you've got half one, half two, full time here again. So half two will mean that they score in the second half more than 1 goal or more. And you've got lots of different options for those depending on how many goals you want to be scored. BTTS is both teams to score. Okay, so in half one, BTTS would mean that the scoreline might be 1-1 at half time. Both teams have scored. So that's half one, both teams to score. Half two would be the same thing if they both scored in the second half, and then full time is just the whole match, obviously. Then we've got scored in and conceded in. Again, these are just time slots. Did they score in 0 to 10 minutes? And then did they score by full time? Score in both halves. This stuff's very kind of self-explanatory. Hopefully you'll already notice from knowing what half-time, full-time is. For example, conceded in 70 to full-time here would just mean they conceded between the 70th and the end of the match. Okay, fairly simple. Again, clean sheet is when the team doesn't concede a goal. So again, some of this stuff you might think is rudimentary, but it's important just to get a clarification on this. I mean, not everyone who trades football watches football as religiously as we do, as a lot of us do. Then failed to score just means they didn't score in the match. How often does that happen? Minutes spent leading, how many minutes did they lead in a match? Minutes spent level, minutes spent behind. Led then lost. Quite a good stat, actually, if you want to find teams that go ahead early and then struggle. Because let's say you get a team that scores first a lot of the time but doesn't win. Well, you can get into a good situation here because if they score first, their odds will come in. You can lay them and then potentially make a profit. Same with led then drew, led then equalised, led then won. So you've got all these options. And again, hopefully this is becoming all very clear what this all means now. So if I said to you, what does ahead by 1 mean? That means leading by 1 goal, ahead by 2, ahead by 3. And then same with behind by just means losing by that amount of goals. Okay, so that's kind of the home percentage. Let's have a look at total now, because let's say I wanted to look at totals. Again, a lot of these are going to be similar, but they're not exactly the same. So I'm going to have a look down. Let's see if we can find something that's a bit different here. As you can see, most stats are going to be the same, but there will be stuff that will be different as we go through these. So one here is the ELO rating. Okay, now ELO is a formula. You can look this up on Google. It's probably the best way to do this, but it's basically a statistical mathematical formula to work out the strength of something. Adams created his own ELO ratings to rate the strength of football teams. A lot of people use these in their strategies successfully. So it might be something to experiment. The higher the rating, the better the team. So in theory, if you get a team that's got a rating of 1500 playing a team that's got a rating of 900, well, the 1500 team is going to be a lot stronger. Now with totals, you also get win streaks. So you could look at what streak this team is on, how many games have they won in a row, trying to find teams that are on winning streaks, drawing streaks, losing streaks, etc. Looking at teams that are on streaks of scoring goals or having goals in their matches as well, which I find quite an interesting one for me as mainly a goals trader. And then the big one you've got here is matches played. A lot of people use this in their strategies. And what this means is that you could set this stat and say you selected matches played. You could then select greater than or equal to 8. And that would mean you want 8 matches to have been played that season. As you see that stat gone there. You'd have to restrict to current season to make that work, otherwise it will look at last season as well. But what that does is it gives you only teams that are partway into a season, and that can be helpful. A lot of people like to use that stat to find teams that have only played a certain amount of games per season, or at least played a certain amount of games per season. Average, again, a similar kind of thing. I'll try and find some different ones for this as well. What's interesting here is that you can get things like, corners per match, half one. What's the average? Corners against per goal. How many corners before a goal is scored? Shots on target per goal. Things like this, okay? I think some of this stuff that's different with the average like these is a little bit more complex. Probably not what you're going to start with straight away, but definitely interesting. looking at, well, how many shots off target do they have per match? How many shots are they having? What are their goal attempts in the first half average? What's their possession? Possession is how long they have the ball compared to the other team in a match. XG, again, another really popular stat. What's their XG? What's their average XG? You might be someone who's going for goals and you want to look at XG. Well, I know, again, a lot of people have successful strategies where they are using XG in their strategies. This is another really good one for that. XG is expected goals, in case you know what that means, sorry. And basically what that means is that it's a mathematical formula, a bit like the ELO rating. It takes into account things like corners, shots on target, pressure, possession, and works out how many goals a team should be scoring per match on average. And people like to use this stat because obviously often in football, your XG could be 3.0, but you might have only scored one goal because you just got unlucky. Maybe you hit the post a couple of times when you should have scored, things like that. That might be an indicator that although you haven't scored that many goals recently, you're due, or that it's going to come, and that you've just basically had bad variance. First goal time is a good one here as well for average, where you can look at, well, I want teams that score later on in the match at their first goal. I don't want teams that score earlier. Maybe I want to have an under strategy that I want to scout at the start of a match. Well, that might be how you do it, looking at when they score, when they concede. Average winning margins, losing margins. Points per game is a really good one to look at because that will tell you, basically how good they are. Points per game. And remember, our software compares the home results for home teams and away results for away teams. So it's not just a simple case of looking at the table. It's cleverer than that. It's more in depth than that. If you look at the table, you can work out the average points per game. But it doesn't tell you all the story because, look, Rosario Central here, yeah, they average about 2 points a game, look, 45 points. But maybe they're getting all their points at home. And if they're playing away from home, that doesn't help me. I want to know that. That's what this software is really good at doing. And then it tells you the average minutes spent leading, etc. And then odds is, again, you're going to want to have another look at this. What are the average home odds, yellow cards? Basically, these aren't going to change much compared to what we've already got. These are just a few of the things. But most of the time when you're using odds, you're actually going to want to use the Betfair stat, which I'll show you in a second. So that is most of the options, just looking at the total, average, and percentage, which are basically the three main things that you're going to use a lot of the time. Okay. Now, when we're looking at Betfair, which is another one I wanted to get into in a bit more depth here, what we can look at with Betfair is we can look at odds of markets. And what's key with this is that if you've got a strategy and you know that, well, I'm usually getting about, 75% of the time I'm getting over 2.5 goals. Well, I want my odds to be above 1.33. If my odds are below that, I'm not actually getting value. So I feel like when you're looking at the odds, it's a very good way of working out whether your strategy could potentially be value. And we've got odds on the correct score markets here. You've got the score lines you can use. Again, as we're looking here, we've also got match odds as well. Favourite, underdog, home, draw, away. And then we've also got the over-unders, which is the one I use nearly all the time, okay? So you might want to find over 2.5 and then go, right, I want odds that are greater than or equal to 1.5, okay? Then we add that in. Let's call it over 2.5, example. Put an S on the end to make it different, okay? And then, as you can see here, I've saved it, okay? So, we kind of covered what most of the main terms mean on the software, and hopefully you've got it now. I'm now going to go through a bit about this next phase. So, I've created this stat here. You saw how I did it. I just chose Betfair, then chose odds, and I chose under 2.5, okay? Greater than or equal to 1.5 odds, okay? Now, when I saved it, I gave it, and you have to give it a name to save it, right? when you click save, you actually get these matches pop up, okay? And you might think, well, what does this all mean? So criteria 1 is your only criteria here. Remember, we've only got one filter so far. And it tells us very simply what the last price matched on the under 2.5 odds was. And we can see here, Haipong, under 2.5 odds was matched at 1.94. Okay, great. That qualifies for our strategy. Here it's 1.59. Here it's 2.36. And you'll notice all of these odds are above 1.5. So the filter has done what we asked it. So even if you're sitting there going, I don't want to create anything complex, that's fine. Look how simple this is, just one little filter. It's already narrowed my match selection down massively. And now I can start to look further in depth at these matches I want, if I want, or I could add another filter into this. I might want to look at overall. So let's look at percentage, overall percentage, under 2 full time, under 2.5 goals, which is here. Okay, so select that. And then, we're looking at, what are we looking at here? Odds of 1.5. So we want to win that, at least 2/3 of the time to break even. But obviously, we'll make a profit because most of the time the odds are going to be above 1.5. So I could very easily put here, okay, I want it to be greater than or equal to, let's say, 65%, right? So I want under 2.5 to happen that often. Now, this might not show any means this is quite a high one to us. So we'll have a look here. And we have got 2 matches. Okay, so these 2 matches, we'll go back to it. They have under 2.5 goal odds above 1.5. And in their last 10 home for the home team, 10 away for the away team, under 2.5 has been 65% or more. Okay, so that could be the first thing I look. And I've already narrowed down my selections quite a bit. And I wouldn't then go and trade this straight off the bat. I'd then have a look and see, right, well, where are the possible angles here? Is there anything else I need to be aware of? I'd then record the data. So if you click export, it will actually export the data for you. So you've got your selections there. You can put those into a spreadsheet. We do provide a spreadsheet. So if you want a spreadsheet, again, just email info@betfairtradingcommunity.com to get hold of that. You can also select these games and have a little further look into it and go, okay, half time, 10 times, and the last 20 matches has been 0-0. That's quite a high. If you want to look at percentage, you can click that. That's quite a high percentage, 50% of the games, 45% for this Tunisian game. Okay, so you can start to look at this stuff in a little bit more depth and research it further. Remember, with this software was built by you, for you. Okay, so you might say, well, why do you have so many options? Why, when I select under 2.5 full time, could I have selected about 100 different things? The reason is that this is what traders ask for. So we cater to all audiences, whether you're a new trader or experienced. Obviously, we've got a lot of pro traders who use this software. In fact, it's probably predominantly pro traders who are going to use this software for the long term. So it is built with that in mind, because there's no point giving you something really basic and then going, yeah, you can use it straight away, no problem. You won't even have to watch a tutorial video. But here's the problem. As soon as you start trying to move up the levels to becoming semi-pro or pro, you're going to get stuck because the software isn't strong enough to rise to your level. So that's why it is that way. And again, once you break it down, it's actually quite simple to use. One thing I'll say is just go and have a bit of a practice. If you do want to create a strategy, think of the market you want to create it for. Even if it's just something simple like this, where you're comparing 2 things, all we're doing here, and I'll just update that, all we're doing here is comparing the under 2.5 goal odds with the under 2.5 percentage of those last few matches, okay? And then we can test that to see if that brings some value. And again, you might want to look further into these matches. Well, what are the half-time and full-time scores? When are the goals coming? You can see here, 21-30, quite a high rate of goals. huge rate of goals towards the end of the match here, 71 to 90, about 35% of the total goals being scored in that time. And we can actually see a much higher percentage of the goals are scored in the second half. Now, again, that's information you can use for your trading. When you start tracking that data, when you start looking at stuff like this is actually what's going to separate you from, basically separate the wheat from the chaff as a Betfair trader. Okay, I think this tutorial is definitely long enough. Well done if you've got this far. Give yourself a pat on the back. I know that most people won't even watch this far. The amount of times I get a question and I ask, well, did you watch the 2-minute tutorial video you were sent? Oh no, I couldn't be bothered to watch that. So well done. If there's anything you don't understand, again, just get in touch and talk with us. I run the customer service, right? It will be me you are talking to. So I will help you with this stuff. And if I don't get your email, keep hassling me or find another way to communicate. Like I say, YouTube comments. I had one the other day from a guy and he said, "Oh, Martin, you haven't responded to me. I emailed you, a couple of times in the last month." And I thought, that's really strange because I respond to all the emails we get. And I checked the spam folder and realised that they'd been going to spam. And usually emails don't go to spam, obviously, unless they're kind of, spammy type emails. So that was a bit annoying. But hey, what can you do? These email providers, they have their spam service and sometimes they get it wrong. So that's something I need to check a little bit more. But also just be aware of that. If I haven't replied to you, it's honestly not because I've ignored the email. Anyway, guys, hopefully that has helped you. And like I say, there's plenty of ways to get in touch with us if it hasn't or if you need any further help.